Hi guys, this is Faiza Abbas and I'm back with another episode of my interview series. Today I have in conversation with me Kate Garrett. Kate Garrett is a writer with a significant folklore, history and horror obsession. Her work is widely published and she has been nominated for Best of the Net and Pushcart and also longlisted for Saboteur Award. Kate has had two books published in 2021, the time-hopping historical verse novella Heart and Harpenny, and the Free Spirit otherworldly poetry collection Sunward Moonwise. She lives with her husband, children, and an assortment of pets in the West Midlands of England. Hi, Garrett. How are you?
Hello, I'm okay. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Okay, Garrett. So, my first question to you is, about your childhood. So, tell me, how was your childhood, and do you have any memories with regards to writing in your childhood, or not? If not specific to childhood, any interesting memories that you remember or you cherish? Feel free to share.
Oh yeah, I actually did decide when I was very small that that writing was for me. Before I could actually write words, I can remember saying I want to make a book, and I was about three and a half, four, maybe, yeah, about three and a half. I was nowhere near school age yet, and my grandma would put together these like bits of cardboard and like scrap paper, and I would just like make stories about Care Bears. They were like my favorite thing at that stage. I just remember, but like sometimes they veered into sort of creepy Care Bears, because I can remember drawing one that had to like fight another Care Bear to get a knife off of him, and like I was always a little strange. So when I've grown up and like ended up doing quite a lot of sort of like darker bits of history or horror, or sort of grim topics I've written about, it's not really a surprise. And then like as I got older, um I had an auntie who was very important to me, and she's passed away now. She was more like a big sister, but she got me interested in like horror and fantasy and like I don't necessarily write stuff that's very specifically genre, but all the time. But there's always that sort of element of it in the writing that I do. And I put it down to a lot to her for introducing me to sort of magical, scary, weird things. So that's part of it. And my grandpa used to tell a lot of stories too. Like I grew up with a lot of different family members, and quite a few of them were like storytellers. They were always telling like stories from what they heard when they were younger, or folklore and stuff. So yeah.
Wow, that's such a sweet childhood. Wow, I mean, I'm so, thinking that, you must have a great childhood, like the way you have described it.
I mean, it was actually pretty awful in places, but I had a lot of good people as well. Like there were some yeah, I wouldn't say I had a great childhood, as far as the fact that I've had to have a lot of therapy actually for like various things. There were things that were not good, but my extended family, like grandparents and some aunties and cousins, and I just knew a lot of, I had some terrible adults in my life, but I also had some really good ones. So it was balanced in that way, I suppose. But yeah, so I touch on the bad things in poems. It's not something I always want to like dwell on now, but like it does come up in your writing if you've got like upsetting things that are just, you process them through being creative sometimes, and you make art out of them. But yeah, but the good stuff was an influence as well as the bad. So yeah.
I see. And now you're such a great poet, so you have, made your way through those challenges, and now you have earned that place. So, like, that's a big thing. So, I want to ask you that what kind of poems or stories did you like to read when you were a child? And, have your preferences changed now that you have gone through different phases of life?
Um, Let me think. I definitely, what was I reading when because I started reading really young, because my grandparents taught me to read from a very young age. And I'm trying to think. I know that my first favorite book when I was tiny that used to get read to me a lot was like a Sleeping Beauty book, but it was like the Disney version, which is, and I think looking back now, I think a lot of fairy tales are quite dark and not great, but they're still good. Like I like fairy tales and folklore and myths. But obviously a lot of fairy tales like Sleeping Beauty is kind of creepy now. When I would grow up thinking about it, like, wow, no, you shouldn't just go kissing like dead women for one of like sleeping women. It's not okay. But but I loved princess and fairy tale stuff. And like then when I got a bit older, I got into horror. I think I read Stephen King for the first time when I was under 10, which was probably not great. But it was, and like I definitely watched Stephen King films when I was small, like smaller than that. So it was only natural I'd pick up the book if I had access to it. But I still love horror. I read a lot more. I was gonna say, I didn't really get into poetry until I was about 12. So I'd always thought that I would grow up and be a novelist or something because I loved big books, like long stories and big fantasy and horror fiction. And now that I have 5 kids, I actually can't read huge books as much as I did when I was a kid. Like I can't read them as quickly because there's too much to do. But I still like them. I probably read less fantasy than I did as a kid, and more poetry, because like I say, I didn't get into that until I was about 12, and that was when I learned about the poem The Highwayman in school. So it's like a ghost story in a poem, and that had a big influence on me because I realized that you could write a story in a poem. Prior to that, I thought poems, I wasn't really sure what the point was because I was a child, so it's fine. It was like they just rhyme, that's all. That's what, they're just rhymes, and I didn't really get it until then. And then everything clicked, and I was like, oh, it's also telling stories, but it's like, the words are fun in a poem. And I got really into poetry just via that one poem. And then kept discovering more and more poetry and poets as I grew. So yeah, I forgot the question. Oh, that my taste changed. Yeah, I would say I read less sort of fantasy fiction because it tends to be so long and I don't always have time for that, but I do like it. And a lot more poetry. And I also used to read a lot more sort of sciencey things, like nonfiction science. I used to be, and now I read, like as a child, and now I read more history than I did as a child, because there were only certain bits of history I was interested in. And as I've got older, I want to know all the history about everything. Like it could be history I've never heard of, but if someone talks about it, I'm like, well, that's really cool. I want to know more. And it's, yeah, so that's changed. It's swapped. I still like all the same things. I just don't, I've added to it. So those things have fallen by the side a bit.
Okay, so you have talked about Stephen King. Stephen King is, one of my favorite writers as well. So I have recently read his book, The Shining, and I was so scared that it was very weird. I couldn't even process anything else. I couldn't be alone in my room at all at that time. After
Oh
reading
no.
that book, it was a very traumatizing experience, to be honest. And I loved that book as well as the movie. So as you have talked about, your influences of history as well as folklore as well as fantasy, in your writing. So do you still, incorporate those themes into your writing now, or have you started exploring themes that are different from all those themes instead?
No, those things are definitely all over my writing, even if I'm writing, and I don't think I was always fully aware of it. But even if I'm writing something that's real, like it's a real life inspiration behind it, it'll still have something strange and maybe a little bit off about it, which I think is true of a lot of poetry anyway, because I think one of the things about poetry that makes it different to prose is that it's like stark, and it does something different. It makes you feel different. It's the way that it's written is just, sometimes I think we need poetry to explain poetry because it's a feeling more than a thing that you can properly explain sometimes, because that's why there are so many debates about, like, what what is poetry. And it's because there isn't just one formula to make a poem. It's more of how a piece of it makes a person feel when they read it. So yes, there's weird stuff in my poems all the time. And at the moment, I mean, there are other things that I'm writing about now that are maybe like less horror or history or folklore. Like I'm trying to write a sequence of poems about fish keeping and chronic illness, because I have a fish who is always ill and I have chronic illness. So I was like, and it's also kind of about animals and letting them be animals, because sometimes when you have a pet, you just want to like somehow make it do whatever. And it's like, animals are just going to be themselves. Sometimes they're like sentient beings with their own sort of lives. So I find this so much with my fish. He's like a little betta fish and he's always hurting himself. And it's just because he's so like, they're quite like daring and dangerous little fish. So he's always getting himself stuck in like driftwood. And but yeah, since we've got him, it's just been like I'm always having to look after him. But I also have chronic illness. So it's brought these odd elements together. And there's also sort of themes of like impermanence and non-attachment, like Buddhist concepts that I've brought in because I spent quite a long time, what would I say, practicing Buddhism, and like the style of meditation. And it's always been a big part of my life for like quite a long time now. But I've only written a couple of poems with that stuff in them deliberately. I would say it's actually in quite a lot. Stuff sneaks in that you don't know you're writing about, I feel sometimes. So yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so I want to ask you about your publications now. So, do you have any recollections of the first time your work got published for the very first time, and how did that feel like?
What was when I was published for the first time? Is that the question?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let me repeat it. So I'm asking that do you have any recollections of the first time your work got published, and how did that feel like?
Okay. I have the first time I ever got published, I was 17. And that was just I actually almost can't remember what that felt like. It was so long ago now, but it was just in like a student sort of magazine that used to be published. It was in the States because I grew up in the States. And yeah, I just remember being shocked that I just on a whim sent a poem in. Because I think when you're 17, you're a lot more like, well, I might as well, compared to when you get older and you start worrying about it. And then I just like received a copy, and they gave everyone who got published like this pencil as well. And I was like, oh, right, I've got a published poem. And then I didn't have anything else published again until I was 31, because I had like life got in the way massively. And I did learn to be nervous, and I did learn to like hide, and it wasn't very nice. And then when I got published the first time as an adult, oh, weirdly, I think that might have been in the Buddhist poetry review, which I just said, oh, I never really wrote, but I wrote a poem about my cat being like a Zen master and teaching me how to be like, how to sort of have like beginner's mind and be like really Zen. And I called it Zen Cat, and Buddhist Poetry Review took that. And the other one was just about going to meditation, like group meditation, and watching squirrels. And it was about having a mind that's too busy and like how to reconcile that with sort of calm and, a calm core, trying to get that when you're, as you could tell from my rambling, my brain is all over the place all the time. So yeah, that was the first publication. I think it was when I was an adult, and I was amazed because again, by then I was afraid to send my work somewhere, and especially because it was so specific. Like I was like, oh, this is really cool. This magazine's full of poems about Buddhism, and they took both of them. So that was really nice. And then later they rejected me on a different poem because that's just how it goes. But yeah, so yeah, and then I just felt encouraged and kept going. And it's always been like a decent mix of rejections with some acceptances. And yeah, so that was, gosh, 10 years ago.
It's very interesting. Yeah, just give me a second. यार कॉल करके उन्हें बोलने के अभी yeah, so that was, I think, yeah, so that was somebody from my, family. They were calling me, so I just told them that, don't disturb me now.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so
No worries.
thank you. Okay, so I want to ask you that, your work has been nominated for Best of the Net and Pushcart prizes, as well as longlisted for Saboteur Award. So that is so impressive, I mean. But, not at all surprising for me because I have read your work and I know it's great. So, but I want to ask you, like, which poems were they that were nominated? And what was your first reaction when you came to know about your nomination? And if you have some something to tell about that, so would really love to hear that.
Okay. Um, I've only had one poem nominated for Pushcart Prize, and that was quite early on. That was, maybe it was 2014. And I was kind of amazed because I didn't really know what that meant at the time. So I had to look it up and learn what Pushcart Prize was. Like, I just went into things like not really knowing a lot about, the literary world. I just knew that there are the magazines online, there are magazines in print, and I read them, and the poetry is great, and there are books, and I read those. But like, so finding out anything about prizes was like new. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing, because it was a poem called Changeling, and so it was like actually about like a strained, difficult relationship like with my mother. And it was also about, at the time I was not diagnosed, but now I know I'm autistic, so it was also about being like a autistic child. And that got nominated for Pushcart Prize. And then I've had a few nominated for Best of the Net over the years, which is really lovely, and I really appreciate that people have done that more than once, because sometimes I just think, like, I'm just there writing what I want to write and trying to be better than my last poem. And like, I don't really think of it in terms of whether anyone else is actually going to like it or not. It's just sort of like, well, do I think this might be okay? Yeah, fine. And then once it's out there, I'm just like, if people like it, great. And if they don't, that's fine, because you can't please everyone. So to get nominated for anything ever, those are nice moments when someone's like, this poem out of all these poems is going to be in this 6, and I'm going to send them off, to Bust to the Net. And then the long listing for the Saboteur Award, that was completely like, a long listing is not a short listing, but I wasn't expecting any of it. I didn't try to get nominated. I didn't say, oh, nominate my book. Like, that's a thing that you're meant to do, isn't it? And I didn't do that. It was The Density of Salt that came out in 2016. And the best part about that pamphlet was that it was published by Indigo Dreams. And I can remember sitting in front of a computer in maybe 2010, maybe, yeah, 2009 to 10, and reading the Indigo Dreams website and being like, I wish that I could get published by them one day, because I liked what they were doing. They have like a sort of, they like lean a lot towards nature and like spirituality and things like that in some of their magazines, and their books are always really lovely and well produced. And I just thought, I wish that I could be published by them one day. And they've published 2 of my pamphlets. And so The Density of Salt was the first one, and that was like longlisted for a Saboteur Award, and that whole thing was really nice. And I don't think I've ever really gone into that before, even in like a written interview of any kind. That was just, yeah, because, and I have told like Ronnie and Don, who run Indigo Dreams, that I remember wanting them to publish me years before they did, and that it was all like a weird sort of, wow, that was like a goal that I set sort of unconsciously, and then it happened. So
Oh, I mean, it's so great when your goals get achieved, and it's just a lovely feeling. So I can I can really resonate with what you are saying. Okay, so now I want to ask you about your two books that recently published in 2021, Heart and
yeah.
Penny and Sunward Moonwise. So what are the themed around, and what parts or keep those two collections close to each other?
Sorry, what was the last bit? It cut out a minute, so I didn't hear that.
Yeah, just a second. Let me repeat it. Okay. So I'm saying that I want to ask you about your two new books that published in 2021, Heart
Yeah.
and Penny and Sunward Moonwise. What are they themed around, and what parts or keeps those collections close to each other? If
Oh,
there is
right.
any
Yeah. Okay.
similarity or differences.
Yeah, it was that last bit that cut out the first time. Right. So Heart and Halfpenny is half of it is historical and half of it is sort of a fictional story in now, set now. And it's well, I started writing it as just a historical collection about King James the Sixth and First, so Sixth of Scotland and First of England. Um, because I didn't like him. He was like not one of my favorite historical figures, because he was known for a lot, like quite a lot of things, but people don't tend to write about him as much. Um, as far as historical fiction goes, there's other figures and monarchs that they write about, and but like he's known for the translation of the Bible, like the King James version, and he's known for witch trials, because he was quite like superstitious, and he was really frightened of like being killed by witchcraft. So he wrote sort of a book about it called Demonology, and then he was responsible for some witch trials, most notably like the North Berwick trials, because he was allegedly cursed by this coven of witches, but apparently they were put up to it by like another noble or something. So anyway, I was like, well, he's not a very nice guy, because he was like, burning women at the stake and whatever. And so I was researching him and reading everything about him, and then I thought, well, no, that's still bad. But by the time he was King of England, like he was King of Scotland, he hated witches. By the time he was King of England, he was sort of like, oh, that's not really that big of a deal anymore. I don't really hate witches now. And he sort of was like, it's not even real. It doesn't matter. But like by then it was like, wow, but you've already like caused this to happen. So I just thought, well, he also had, disabilities, and he was bisexual, and there was all this interesting stuff that came up, and he was really superstitious and frightened because, from the time he was born, all those nobles were trying to put someone else on the throne, and like his mother was executed, Mary Queen of Scots. So there was all these reasons behind it. And I think what's interesting about history is just all the ins and outs of, the details, because nothing's ever that straightforward usually. And then I sort of started thinking about a lot of his ideas, like uniting the countries in Britain, like that was like a thing that he felt entitled to do, like, oh, England and Scotland should just be one country and stuff like that. And obviously there are a lot of people now who still don't agree with that. And so these modern characters that are in the other bit of the poems, the other poems about these people, they are looking at themes like that, like, like beliefs and religion and sexuality and sovereignty, and like whether people have like control of the land, or whether we should like actually listen to, it's like a sort of very pagan sort of thing that I'm doing with it, like listening to the land itself, because it's important, because I think we sort of like, ecology is important, and the environment's important, and not like now it's really important to sort of look at the world as being, we are part of the world and not just on it. And I guess that theme comes up a bit because plenty of people are just like King James, and they're just like, well, this country should be like this. And it's like, it's not just like a bunch of borders, it's like a living, breathing, we live on the earth. Anyway, all of that is sort of in there. Whether people find it, I don't know, it's up to them. And Sunward Moonwise is just a bunch of poems about trains and pubs and just meeting people for 5 minutes and interacting with them, and it's just strange. And I had so hard to describe that one. I sort of see it as like the festival book, because it's like traveling around Britain on a train or lots of trains and going to pubs and going to festivals, and then sometimes writing about some pretty upsetting things along the way, but always done with a little bit of hope in there. And there's witches in that too. There's witches everywhere. Everything I write's got witches in it. So
Now that's interesting. I'm going to keep it in mind. Okay. So, as we were talking before the interview, that I was telling you that I know you through Bonnie's Crew, where you accepted 2 of my poems. So, besides Bonnie's Crew, you have been an editor of other lit magazines too. Like, for instance, Picaroon Poetry is at the top of my head. So, did your experience as an editor offer that comfort to the writer in you now that you have been on the other side of the business?
it has made me a lot more patient with editors. Like, I don't think I was ever impatient with editors in the first place. I'm not that kind of person. I don't get mad that easily. But like, people are always like, oh, I just, want to hear back really fast. And it's like, it's nice when people respond quickly, but I'm just like, well, take your time. Life is life, and magazines aren't all of life. So there's that. And I'm always extra polite. I don't think I wasn't polite before, though. This is the thing. I just feel like I'm way more empathetic like than I was. It's just a little added empathy. I don't really like, if somebody rejects, the rejections are easier to cope with, because if somebody rejects my poems, it's like, well, they are rejecting my poems, not me, because I've had to do that before, like so many times, because you literally can't accept everything. And sometimes stuff is just really not what you're looking for. But I don't ever think that, like, I personally believe, and this doesn't mean like, how to explain it? I personally believe that everyone's writing, yeah, some pieces might need more work, but each person has their style. And even if it's a style that I don't particularly want to publish, I think someone out there will probably enjoy reading it, because there's so many people in the world and there's so many different ways to write. And sometimes, yes, stuff does need work. I've helped a few people when I've had time, like made suggestions for what might make something stronger, but it's so subjective that I didn't really ever like doing that, just because people could get offended, and also I might be wrong. So it was just, yeah. But like, so where was I? Rejections. That's the main thing. If you're an editor, you get less sensitive to rejections, but I think you get less sensitive to those anyway, just the longer you are sending things out and writing, because there's just, I almost get bored if too much stuff gets accepted, because I'm just like, I need to try harder and like send to places that are harder to get into or something, like it's a sign of like not trying hard enough if all you do is get accepted. I find that's my editor head talking as well, because like I just feel like, yeah, you don't want to constantly get accepted.
That's a very, soothing thought, I would say. I'm actually going to remember it, and it will help me as well, because sometimes, we get, a little tensed or a little upset after rejections. But yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, the long you try and the more you try and the longer it, takes you to get there, I think it is better in a way that you keep trying. So yeah, you're right
Yeah.
about that. Okay, so another question that I have from you is like, as a writer, sometimes we set goals for us ourselves, like, but there is a learning curve for each writer, and which is very different from another writer. And but since we can only see our journey or our learning curve, so we think that maybe we are lagging behind or something like that. So did you ever feel like that now or in your childhood? If yes, how did you cope with that?
Did I ever feel like I was behind? And so I don't quite understand the question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries. Let me repeat. Okay, so I'm saying that as a writer, sometimes it happens that
Yeah.
we set goals for ourselves that, but there is a different learning curve for each writer. So your different learning curve might be different from another writer. So, but
Yeah.
since we can't see another person's journey or their, progression, so we sometimes
Yeah.
think that maybe we are lagging behind. So, did you ever feel like
Uh,
that now or in your childhood?
all the time. I don't think I even know what my goals are sometimes. Like I just, like I said earlier, I just write. I get ideas, and then I do have a degree in creative writing as well. So I should be like more on the ball, but I'm not, because the main thing about it for me is the writing. So I know that I want to be read, because it's important. It's an important part of it, the sharing. And I'm a reader, so I really like the idea that if I'm writing something, it's being read as well. The two things go together for me. I think if I wasn't read, I would still write, which is why um, I struggle with having set goals, because no matter what, I'm going to be writing. So like, I think I really have a lot of respect for people who are like super professional about their writing, and they're like, right, I've done this, now I need to do this, and now I need to do this, and like, that they are actually doing that, like they're really trying to be successful, and I'm just like, not trying. I'm lucky that I have done any of the stuff I've done, because I have such a like frazzly brain where I'm not always very focused, and I have lots of kids, and like I need, well, I say I need goals. I have vague ideas of goals rather than like a step-by-step plan that I know other people have. So yeah, I feel behind all the time, but it's only my fault. Like I can't ever complain, because I'm not really putting in the right effort in the right places sometimes. Um, Especially since the pandemic and all the lockdowns and everything have really thrown me off. um so I've still been writing and submitting, but nowhere near like I used to. I feel like sort of in the middle of the last 10 years, I was constantly writing new things, and I was always submitting like loads of times a week, like at least once a week. And now it's like I'm lucky if I've submitted once a month. It's usually every few months. And so I definitely know that I'm probably am actually behind. It's not just that I feel like I am. I can do more, but sometimes it's just, you know, the kids are more important ultimately than, where I'm getting published. And it could change obviously when they're grown and they're all grown and I'm an older poet, than if I'm, able to change my focus then. But yeah, I just like, I'm happy to be published and read at all at this point. And I do feel like it probably looks on the outside to a lot of people like, well, that's just Kate Garrett, I've never heard of her. Or like, that's just like Kate Garrett who gets, you know, writes weird little poems and whatever. Like, I don't think that any, I just like, when you're like, oh, you've done all these great things, and I just don't see it that way. I'm just like, well, I don't know, have I? But I'm also quite proud of it at the same time, the things that I've done, because my eldest child is 18, so I haven't, like, I've been a mom a long time, so all this time where I've been getting my poetry published, I've also been like looking after children. And there's a lot of like poets and writers out there who have lots of other responsibilities besides writing. And I just think it's great that anybody is doing this, like, because it's an art, like it's creative act. And to juggle that with like a job, kids, you know, caring for anybody like a parent or some, you know, like any kind of anything. It's amazing that any of us are doing what we're doing. So yeah, I don't know if that made sense.
No, I think every writer feels that. But I have read your work, and you are a wonderful writer. Trust me, I love your work. I have even
Thank
shared
you.
your work with my husband, and we love your work, honestly. Especially some of your poems were published in Up the Staircase Quarterly, and I really
Oh,
love that. Yeah, I really love that. So yeah, you are doing great. So please don't feel that you are not, because you are. Okay,
thank
so
you.
my pleasure. Okay, so I want to ask you that, if there's any poem that you would like to share, or any poem, or one poem, multiple poems, anything. We would love to hear you.
What, mine?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm so unprepared. Hang on, I'll find a book.
no
Uh,
worries. Take your time.
um, I did a Zoom reading not long ago, so they were in my cupboard. But I don't know what I would want to read. Oh gosh. Um. Oh dear. I'm so unprepared. I'm really sorry.
No,
I
no, no
didn't
worries.
know I was
Do you
going to be
want me to
reading a poem.
send you links of some of your poems that I like? You want that?
Sorry. Oh, do you have favorite poems of mine?
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh.
Let me send you just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay, let me just put it in the chat.
Okay, yeah. Oh gosh.
And this was published in Clear Poetry, and I know I love that.
Which one is that? Sorry.
The
Oh,
three of your poems were published in Clear Poetry, and I love that. I think just give me a second. Just give me a second.
sure.
So sorry for the interruption.
Okay.
Okay, so I have put some links in the chat, so you can, if you like, you can read them. Some of your poems that I really like.
Oh, I can read this one. Oh, my son was so young when I wrote this poem. So I can read the one you sent, following the River X on a Wednesday afternoon. That was actually in the Density of Salt. So the book I was talking about earlier, that was Longlistee for Saboteur and everything. That poem's actually in that book. I'll read this one.
Sure. If there's anything else that you want to read, please feel free. So
If I
if
could think of one off the top of my head, I just feel like, oh, I should have prepared for this.
no,
Obviously,
that's
if we talk
completely
about
fine.
writing.
That's completely fine. You can read it. I would love to hear you. Whatever you will read, I know it's going to be great. So yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Following the River X on a Wednesday afternoon, my son fixates on sailboats. We both dream of riding the currents out to open sea, so we breathe in midday shadows, meditating on the shimmer of the aqua air. I tap his temples, wisp lavender under his nose. I hold his hand until he finds his peace. We walk along the pavement heading east. This is not like our river, tamed by industry, churned with purpose. This river remembers smugglers, the density of salt. The boy tilts his head, squints and smiles while the pale sun turns blue waves to a shiver. Thank you.
Anything else that you want to read, then please go ahead.
I think I'll read another river poem actually.
Yeah.
Because we've moved to another town now. So that I wrote that poem after visiting Devon, is in the south of England. And so that was about the River Exe, which runs through Exeter and into the sea at Exmouth, I guess. And then the other river mentioned in that poem is the River Don that runs through Sheffield, which is where I used to live. And then last year we moved to Ludlow, and I wrote this poem before we actually moved here. And there's another river called the Team, which is out there somewhere. I'm just by the window. And I can see Ludlow Castle from my window. And so it's just the river and the castle has made me think of this. Daniel Defoe, who was a writer in the sort of early 18th century, he's one of my favorites because he was like a novelist, a poet, a political activist, a spy. Like he did all these cool things. And what he did at one point was go all around Britain and visit like loads of towns. And he wrote this huge book about it. And he went to Ludlow, he mentioned the castle, and he called it the very perfection of decay because it was like already crumbling even by that point. So I came here to do a festival once, and my husband and I had already decided we wanted to move here, but it was like the year before we actually moved that I sort of spent a lot of time by myself during the time I came to perform. And I was standing behind the castle by the river, and I was thinking of Daniel Defoe and like plans and change. And anyway, this poem came out. A chat with Daniel Defoe behind Ludlow Castle. My shoes won't fit just so to your 300-year footprints in the dirt beside the Team, where you once admired the disused towers, beginning their descent to today's ruin. Now you interrupt my quiet moment. I know my piece is modern, electric. Silence is never what it promises to be. I watch the river pulse with days of summer storms, children laughing on the green. My toes point over the edge of the bank, boosted by the rush of water. I reflect on a future I mean to shape, watch interlaced strands of centuries and picaresque, imagined lives, truth in the flesh, create a place for you to cross. You tell me things must change, and we will too.
I loved it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to ask you that if there's any message that you would like to give to the up and coming writers, so please offer that.
Gosh, okay. It's so cliched, but just keep writing. Don't let rejection stop you. You have to send things out to be rejected. So you're still one step ahead of anyone who doesn't do that. You know, even if you decide to put your work on your own website or on Instagram or wherever YouTube, if you decide to get your work in front of people, that's, you know, if you want to share it, don't be scared, because there's going to be somebody out there who wants to read it. And, you know, if you want to be a writer, like you're already a writer if you're writing, but if you want to be a read writer, then you send your work out into the world. And if you get rejected, that's fine, because it happens to literally everyone. And it is many people who say that, you know, like we talked about Stephen King earlier. Stephen King has written at length about his huge rejection pile that he has had, well, when he was younger, and he had like a spike on the wall and he would stick his rejections on it, or, you know, but people still got upset. So it's like, it's part of it. Don't let it bother you, and keep trying to be better than you were yesterday. Like, I think better is the wrong word. Do something different all the time. Like, always try to build on what you've already done, and also read and listen. So even if you don't want to pick up a book and you're a poet, but listen to poets, always take in other words, because you're not gonna you know, excel at writing if you're not taking in the work of other writers. That's pretty much it.
That's such a beautiful advice. So I would wrap it up now, and I would just say that anybody who wants to read Kate's work, so you can find out more of her work on her website, which is www.kategarrettwrites.co.uk. And you can also follow her on Instagram at the folklore FAERY fairy, or very rarely on Twitter, which is folklore_fairy. So I'll also put it up, in the outro of the interview. So, and also you can buy her books. So international, I think it's a bit difficult for international readers to buy her books, but you can reach out to her and see if there's any alternate method through which you can buy her books. And yeah, so that's about it from my side. Kate, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
No, I don't think so. But it's been really great that you've invited me onto your channel, and I'm sorry for rambling. I tend to ramble a lot, so sorry about that.
No,
But
no,
it was
you
good.
don't need
They were
to.
good questions. Sorry.
I'm saying you don't need to say sorry. You were perfectly all right. I love talking to you. And I'll just, turn off the recording so we can chat. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can chat for a while and then, post interview. So, yeah, we are done.